Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and thank you all for joining us. We've got a great lineup for today's discussion around collaborating to advance mobile graphics and gaming. As we get started, we'd like to encourage all of you to post your questions in the chat. The recording will be made available to you after today's discussion, and we've got a short survey at the end to canvass your input and anything you'd like to hear as we build out this panel discussion series. With that, I'd like to introduce our fearless moderator, Royal O'Brien, General Manager of Digital Media and Games at the Linux Foundation. Royal, over to you.
Thank you, Nicole. So thank you everybody for coming today. We're really excited to kind of talk about this area. You'll find out that and when it comes to mobile and games, it's kind of a limited subset. It's really what you can build. And this is really about the impacts of open source and how we can work to that, to building things that work much better on mobile, to kind of grow that area. So some people are wondering, what is the Open 3D Foundation, Open 3D Engine? It is a AAA class engine that is platform agnostic, so you can be on Windows, Mac, Linux, also build for Android, iOS. And it's designed there so that people can build really anything that they want within this engine without any kind of licensing. It's under Apache 2, so that means you can go and get the source code of all of it and do anything that you want and build whatever you want on top of it. And the mission of it is really to make an open source, kind of fully featured, high fidelity, real-time 3D engine that's built for games and really any other industry. So if you get some time, take a look, go to o3d.com or 3.org, excuse me, and take a look and get a better understanding of what this engine contains. And the other part is become a part of the community and take a look at all of the different support and the people that are in Discord and everything else that surrounds it. Now, today we want to spend a little bit of time talking about mobile devices. And so we have a mobile device working group. And the purpose of this group really is to kind of advance the mobile graphics standards and technologies. You'll find out that as you change mobile devices, it can be a mixed bag. Sometimes it'll be really performant, sometimes not so performant. Sometimes it'll turn into a fiery brick in your hand, which is really a bad thing. So how can we actually look at using an open source engine and have companies and a community support this that can build really good performant games on mobile devices without killing the battery and without them having a poor experience? So with that in mind, we have a panel of members here to be able to talk today. And I'm going to introduce each one of the panels to say a little bit about each other and, well, about themselves, because I don't know what they're going to say about each other, and kind of let them go from there. So we have Chris Melissinos, who is Worldwide BD and Strategy over at AWS, Game Engine and Developer Services. Chris, great to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me, and hello, everybody. So as Royal said, Chris over at AWS has spent about 22 years in the games industry, focused on everything from building early Java mobile APIs all the way to big infrastructure from big companies like Activision and Sony and all of the suspects. So glad to be on the panel today. Thanks for having me, Royal.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. And now we have also Travis Boatman, who is the CEO of Carbonated. Travis?
Yeah, super excited to be here. Long-time games practitioner, sort of started in the late 80s. Been making games for a long time, but really jumped into mobile in kind of the late 90s, early 2000. And love the mobile game space. So excited to be here and hopefully adding as much as I can, kind of the mobile lens to the great Open 3D effort. So nice to be here.
Awesome. And we have Chris Melissinos, who is a co-founder and CEO of Heroic Labs. Chris? Great to have you.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me, Royal. I've been in the industry about 8 years, mostly focused on server-side game tech. Happy to be partaking in the open source aspects of Open 3D Engine and contributing where we can on the graphics side and hopefully networking areas as well. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. And then we have Tobias Alexander Franke, Principal Game Engine Architect from Huawei. Tob, always awesome to see you.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Tob. I've been in the games industry for now about 7 years. Been a huge gamer before that, of course, and worked on the sidelines in research before. So Very happy to be here, especially because it's a main topic for Huawei.
And then, of course, we have Tyrran Ferguson, who is the head of strategic ecosystem activities over at Imagination Technologies. Tyrran?
Hello, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. Yeah, really excited from an IP vendor perspective, closer to the hardware with a lot of PDK software and stuff. This discussion and O3D generally interests us a lot. So thanks for having me.
Excellent. And Hongyu Sun for Senior Director over at Oppo. Hongyu?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I have been spending like 8 years in mobile industry. Before Oppo, I was also part of the Huawei. I've been working on graphics domain. So very excited to see we have such a huge open source game engine. Very excited. Thank you for invitation.
Excellent. So for everybody out there, we have a really good mix of game developers, hardware, software, back end, front end, kind of that rich blend where everybody has a particular opinion on what they see in the market. And that's the idea, is to cover a lot of these different areas. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and kind of kick this off and get a little of the sparks happening. And so the first question I want to present to the panel here is, let's look at where mobile games and where things have come from, right? And how the trends have occurred. I mean, we've seen things change from the 90s to 2000s, and we've kind of reinvented ourselves. But here we are now, 2023. And so for the panel, what are you seeing as some of the latest trends in mobile graphics and gaming? Anyone can grab that one.
I'll throw myself into the fire. Why not? I mean, I think it's pretty obvious, but I think mobile players are kind of consist of everybody on Earth. Mobile is the largest sector of games that there is. It's much bigger than PC and console. It's growing faster, although I think this year might be declining a little bit, but generally speaking, it's growing faster than the rest of the industry. And I think mobile players are hungry for what they see on other devices. So they're looking for more high fidelity games, they're looking for deeper games with better gameplay and better experiences. And they can look to other hardware, whether it's their PC or their desktops, to say, like, I want graphics like that on my phone. So the demand's there. And these days you're starting to see those high fidelity games start to dominate the top charts. So you're seeing the Fortnites, the PUBGs, the Diablo Immortals, Genshin Impact. A lot of these kind of high fidelity games are making their way to mobile because that's essentially what consumers are demanding. So the next generation of engines are going to need to support high fidelity graphics and that kind of performance. And I think that's what I'm excited about with Open3DE, because it is sort of leaning into the future of where the industry is going and not looking too far back in the past. And that's supported by the audience of players who want those high fidelity games.
So Chris, what do you think on some of that, where you see these games coming from one platform to another? I mean, you've been in this forever. Yeah.
So I completely agree that those are the trends that we're seeing. I also think it's important to remember that when you're building games for mobile, it's important to leverage the capabilities and the form of mobile, right? So we saw earlier examples of trying to bring big console games down to mobile, and then realizing maybe that's not the right experience, or maybe it doesn't have the right control setup, or maybe the audience that is most attracted to a particular game, that's not where they choose to play it. So it's not just about the technology. It's also making sure that as we build games out that are mobile, that fit on a smaller screen, that are going to be kind of out in the world and set ourselves up for different types of multiplayer experiences, that the gameplay takes advantage of what makes mobile an awesome platform, not just trying to do a straight port of these bigger games on different platforms over to mobile. So lean in, leverage the strengths of the mobile form factor and platform, and work to make sure we have engines that can provide the fidelity and graphics that more and more consumers demand.
I'm a little curious, and really, Hongyu, Tyrran, excuse me, and Tobias, how do we get this fidelity up without turning this hardware device into a brick? How do we keep the battery from not dying out instantly? And how do you think open source can help out in that matter?
So I can quickly answer that. It turned out the game industry on mobile device is really challenging, because the technology chain is very long. For example, when the IP provider, the chipset manufacturer, they release a new GPU features it takes a long time, a lot of effort to deliver to like Travis Game Studios. Because like when they have a new GPU feature that can improve the game fidelity, this new GPU feature needs to first land into game engine, and the IP provider need to collaborate with a device manufacturer like Huawei and Oppo to actually integrate into the driver and doing testing. And finally, after all this and getting to game engine, the game studio take another 2 or 3 years to adopt the technology. So the chain is very long. So there's a lot of non-technical side of collaboration, negotiation. If we have an open source platform like Open3DE, like every partner in this chain can contribute simultaneously, and we have a better collaboration and a shorter circle to land a new technology into the game. Yeah, that's from my opinion. Not sure, Toby, if you want to add something.
I highly agree. One thing that pretty much takes the longest time is this contact from the game developer to the hardware manufacturer. Usually there's a block in the middle. It's some engine developer that is sort of like the funnel through which all the information has to go through. And this is no longer the case here, right? Here everybody can talk to everyone. And so my personal hope is that O3DE will greatly accelerate the development for mobile devices, because a game developer that has a specific problem can now directly go to the O3DE project and directly talk to the involved parties, and be it other game studios, other developers on the engine, or even hardware vendors like Oppo and Huawei.
You know, it's interesting because you've got that perspective from the hardware, and Tyrran, you kind of deal with that before it gets to that point. So here we have kind of that, let's build the first architecture of it, then let's get into the hardware, and then how do we get it to the developer? Tell me about that side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean exactly what these guys are saying, right? So from a hardware perspective, we're looking like 5 years into the future of what we expect as features and things we can add to the architecture. Today, we're exploring that today from a research and development perspective, from an implementation perspective on emulations and early hardware that's even earlier than prototyping. And a lot of that has to do with the hardware, obviously, because it's architectural, but a lot of it has to do with software too, right? The drivers, the APIs, and there's a lot of pain points along the way. So when we end up working with people like Travis, for example, to make sure that their games are being optimized, there are multiple different stages that we need to look into, try and fix multiple platforms, multiple OSs, right? There's a whole range of different issues that can happen. And O3DE brings down that QA process a lot for us, because you can start looking into the source code, as you're mentioning earlier, optimizing a lot easier. And it's not only removing the headache for us, it removes the headache for guys like Travis and indie studios and even AAA studios as well, right?
Yeah, it sounds like really the big piece here is that you don't have to wait until there's a next release of the engine for you to put a feature out. You can do these dynamically. And when we talk about, you know, mobile devices in context of this, I think what we're mainly focusing here is mobile phones, tablets, things that are using like ARM processors, co-processors and things like that. I think Steam Deck falls into a different category because it's basically a PC running a Linux stack. But when we're talking about, you know, even like a Shield, that is considered basically a mobile device because it's an ARM based with a GPU. So tablets, phones, even a Switch, but that's more of an embedded system where the hardware doesn't change, versus phones and tablets that, let's face it, they change continuously, and it's really difficult to keep up with. And so what it sounds like is, if you have a new feature that comes out in a new chipset, you don't have to wait and negotiate all your way through these waters. You can actually create a fork of an open source engine like O3DE and put it out there in the wild, and people can use and implement and test on that before you've even gone through a release cycle. And so you get to work side by side with them instead of a 2-3 year negotiating loop where they can go, hey, this is cool, let's refine this. Does that sound about right?
We can bring them into the research and development early stages, which is at the moment limited to very few studios to be able to do that. So yeah, we can bring them early in the process and optimize much quicker.
So I think one of the big takeaway is that if being involved, if you're trying to get ahead, or you're looking to take advantage of things, or your game needs certain features that may not exist, but you may want, it might be a good idea to actually look at open source and talk with some of these companies. You may have an opportunity to, help kind of change the face of how things are in motion for what the demand is. Because if I'm not mistaken, that's a lot of what you're driven by is demand, right? I mean, it's basically what the customer wants. So, I guess looking at that from that perspective, we're talking about adding these features in and how we can do them and shorten that 3-year window down so we get more advanced elements that are put in. But what are the challenges that you're seeing? And how do we actually advance this? Like, where are the areas you think that we advance some of these pieces?
I would say it's a workflow challenge. So we talked a bit about forking the engine and being able to introduce whatever additional support for hardware that you want to be able to provide faster than might otherwise happen with sort of the negotiation that needs to occur between various stakeholders to achieve it. How that then flows back in, perhaps into the main line, and then becomes part of the testing workflow to make sure that there aren't regressions to that in the future. That itself is a huge undertaking, as with any open source project, is how do I take the contributions, where in this case they could be extremely large, and how do I flow them back into something that the community can manage and own moving forwards?
I'm interested in that one. I'm interested in that part you just said about having to negotiate with the stakeholders. How do you deal with it now that's not open source?
I think Hongyu mentioned a whole lot of the challenges there. He probably can speak to it in more detail than I can, but when you're thinking about it on the hardware side, the driver side, and then flowing it through to the OEMs and then getting into markets, I guess I will defer to people who know this in greater detail than I, but I think it's that challenge is what I mean when I talk about getting various stakeholders together.
I can quickly add into the answer. So from our experience, the very first thing we need to fix for the mobile group is actually the developer experience for mobile developers, because console PC gaming game developer, they the majority of them, they haven't touched the mobile development environment. There is a lot of unique challenges. For example, setting up the mobile developing environment, that's quite different. For example, the current, if you not optimize for the mobile developer, you need a lot of time to set up the, for example, the Android NDK, SDK. There's a lot of version matching, and how to easily deploy your game Python package to the mobile devices. So there's a lot of developer-friendly work need to be done for O3D on mobile perspective. Another thing, headache for mobile developer is the testing environment, because it's a very fragmented world. Like we have so many different devices, even from like a few manufacturers. Internally, we maintain a testing pipeline for hundreds of different device models. I'm pretty sure that even more complex for Huawei perspective. So how to maintain the newer version, the newer game is compatible and flawless for all these devices is very challenging. So that's something we need to pay attention later. The third thing is actually the performance, right? Like if you work on PC gaming, you don't care about how much battery actually consumes, but on a mobile game, it's very challenging, right? Like you don't want your user to drain all your battery within half hour or 1 hour. Yeah, they expect to use after gaming. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just to add to that point, from the power consumption, I think this is something that we saw with Pokemon Go, hordes of people running around in the street with various battery packs just to play the game continuously. This is something that we should not necessarily imitate. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is that since we're an open source community and this is a community-driven project, we might even run into the scenario where the devices that people are using might not even be the newest devices that, for instance, hardware vendors are actually putting out. So you can see this in other open source projects like Lineage OS, for instance, which is this Android fork that people install on pretty old hardware because this one is still maintained. So there's an actual need sometimes for this. And we might see the same thing happen in O3E as well, where people don't necessarily want to run O3E on, the newest phone they can get their hands on, but, this ancient device that they still have flying around at home and don't want to throw away.
So it's interesting you bring that up, because that means that you're saying part of open source is that the ability to maintain different versions that may not align with the company's interests can still be kept and moved forward as part of the community. A perfect example, I look on the threads, the new Galaxy S23 is coming out and all that, right? And so you see people going, hey, I have an S9. Should I upgrade to this? It's like, dude, why do you have an S9? What in the world? Like, but that's a hard reality that still exists, which means they're still playing their games on that device. So I think maybe that's a strong point, that with open source, the community, the people that are still using that device, give it the ability to still be maintained and to make it usable on those.
Well, yeah, look, but I also think that it's more than just that, right? The open source community allows the community that chooses to engage in developing the technology forward for their voice to be heard, right? The reason, and we do have very large member companies that are participating in O3DE, right? The fact that we have, leading mobile, hardware manufacturers and software developers involved there, right? Means they're listening to the community. So if there is a need that may be a bit outside of the field of view for a company or where, mobile space is going, but the community is raising this up, right? It sends signals up that this may be important. And because it's completely open, you can go ahead and prove that it works or prove the need for this, right? So the best thing about open source, and it makes me go back all the way back to my Sun Microsystem days, right? Where, there was this Joy's Law, right? Which I'm paraphrasing, which the smartest people don't work for you, right? And what he really meant was there are smart people everywhere. So if you put technology out into the world and give people tools and access to contribute, they will, and be able to build, better, faster, bigger things, right? That we can all take advantage of. But something else I want to make sure that we go back and talk about that Tob mentioned was Pokemon Go, right? And this was the point where it just kind of brought a whole different class or segment of game players into the fold. And everyone's running around outside and you see your Pokemon in the grass. And what's the first thing that people figured out they needed to do to maximize their playtime? Shut off the camera. Right? Shut off the AR piece of it, because the AR piece, while cool because you could see that digital asset represented through the camera in a physical world, you were still able to extract the same value exchange in the gameplay by not having it on there. So that small trade-off, which lessened the fidelity, right, of the experience, but greatly increased the time you could engage, was a worthy trade-off. So in going after these platforms that are limited in their architecture compared to desktop, that are limited in power compared to desktop, right, but have other advantages like geolocation by outdoor and localized multiplayer that can be done ad hoc and on the fly. Listen to what your players are saying, right? The idea that you may have may not be the ones that they want to go ahead and adopt. So it's constantly making those trade-offs to maximize experience on a mobile platform while also maximizing the functionality of the mobile device. Power, right? Consumption, lower specs, as you mentioned, Galaxy S9, I'm still running an XR. I still walk around with an XR, and the rest of my family is already up on 14s and everything else. Like, why are you doing that? I'm like, because the vast majority of what I use my iPhone for, I don't need anything else right now, right? So we do have this wider expanse of devices out there that people are playing on, unlike necessarily, modern console or devices like that. So those are just a lot of points, but I'm sitting here nodding yes as each one of my colleagues is bringing up awesome and salient points about the power of open source, understanding how to build for those limited platforms, and then listening to what people are actually telling you they want to do when playing your games and being involved in your experiences.
So a lot of people here, that have been involved in the engine and working along with it. And there was a great question that was brought up by Brendan, and it is actually appropriate because we're happening to be right in the middle of this, which is, and the question is, how do you see enabling O3D to scale across all devices? Like, what is needed to be able to scale this across the different devices? And, does that also apply to the software power usage? So what's your thought? Anybody have any thoughts on, the steps of what we need to take to get to that?
I mean, I'm not very technical, so I don't know what the steps would be specifically from a technical perspective, but I can tell you that from just the nature of open source, right? It's open, so it's getting access to wider communities. It's free. You can get a lot of people in the developing world who will get access to this technology, which they wouldn't necessarily be playing with to this level of degree as they would with the larger commercial engines, right? And having more people like that working on the engine and doing testing will naturally help as well, right? It's almost like this natural QA process that happens, so that a lot of the early software issues and stuff that we may find from our perspective working with the studios and the large game developers, some of those issues may get fixed a lot quicker because you've got a wider raft of people looking in on this in a more detailed level. On top of the fact that having access to the source code just helps our engineers and stuff be able to dig under the hood and just improve optimizations and help also kind of bridge that gap that comes with trying to optimize across multiple different devices. And as Chris mentioned, right, multiple devices that are running newer technology. So older devices trying to sustain newer games, and it's putting a lot of pressure on those devices.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things to kind of go along with that, and that is when you optimize the core engine itself so that it's able to use some of the threading capabilities, some of the sleeping cores off of the devices. A lot of those things aren't quite built into a game engine on the onset because it's not really designed that way from the ground up. So that's one of the ways that being able to scale it, making sure that when you're running a screen, that you're not running the thing at 250 frames a second, even though if it's just a black screen, because that will burn it into oblivion. There's a handful of things that can be done. Most importantly is it has a pipeline, a graphics pipeline that you can adjust to accommodate different hardware devices. And so you maintain that pipeline to actually be able to work with those devices and allow you to kind of scale and change things in and out depending on the features of it. So that's also some of the areas that you can look for. But let's see, I want to actually
just to add to that too, it's also, as we keep talking about, is about the trade-offs between what you're trying to achieve on the mobile platform. So when we look at ray tracing, right, on desktop, and RTX and all these games that now people are going back and basically re-releasing as ray tracing releases. Is that completely necessary in the type of game they're going to be developing on your phone? Are there ways to go ahead and bake in lighting in certain areas that are going to give you better performance, better battery life, that isn't going to visually impact the game, right? So on a mobile platform, remember, it's not that these are not powerful devices. They are, right? Very powerful devices, but the things that are powering them, you have to figure out what the trade-off is between the fidelity you want to create and the draining of those resources that affect the other usage of that device for consumers, because it's not just a game device for them. It's their texting device, it's TikTok, it's making calls, it's emergency services, it's all of these other things. So as you're thinking about the trade-offs you need to make and what's flexible about O3DE and being released under Apache 2 is that you have access to the source code of the renderer. So you can go in and make changes to the renderer, into that rendering pipeline, to achieve those types of efficiencies that you want to see out of a mobile renderer. So again, it's about the type of trade-offs. One of the things I always, when you think about it is, do I need 4K textures or 4K textures in this mesh on a 4-inch screen? Probably need it on a 70-inch screen, but on a 4-inch, maybe I don't, right? And so there are trade-offs you can do that improve performance, keep the fidelity that you want, the experience you want to deliver. But again, it's balancing what you need versus what you want inside of those games on mobile because of all those other considerations we talked about. And, and Travis, I mean, they're building a high fidelity game that is very rich and detailed and complex, right? And I'm sure these are some of the things that you think about as a developer in this space of having to make those trade-offs to deliver the experience you want, but balancing the needs of the mobile device.
Yeah, I think, looking at these pieces here, but how does this group feel, how do they feel that open source and standards play in that? I know there was a lot of concern when talking with some of you that some of the standards aren't quite up to snuff on the mobile space, that they can be a little bit scattered. How do you see open source kind of impacting that?
I'll throw in kind of a slightly different lens on how I would think about that or answer it, but I think it also answers a little bit of the question of like why we're so excited about open source. One of the things that's happened in the video game industry, and I think it's analogous to what's going on in this space and why I'm excited about Open3D, is there's a sort of a shortening of time between content creators and customers. In the old days, you'd make a game, you'd build it, put it on disk, ship it out somewhere. And the time between building something and getting customer feedback was measured in years. And as digital distribution showed up and now live ops is showing up, now the time between content creation and customer feedback is oftentimes the same day, and hence the rise of live ops and why games that do a good job at live ops tend to retain their audience, because they're giving content that day. The audience says, I like this, or I don't like this. If they don't like it, the studio is incentivized to not make that bad content anymore, make better content. What I think is cool about open source and this side of it is it's essentially the same thing. You're shortening the time, as sort of Hongyu was saying, from hardware creation. By the time that gets finally all the customer, it's back to that it takes years kind of stuff. But what's great about this is it's shortening. It's almost like customer live ops going into the engine space, where the handset manufacturers, the hardware manufacturers, every part of the stack can get direct feedback really quickly. So you don't have to wait for these really, really, really long cycles to deliver technology to the customers and get feedback. The customers are here today in the process of making it. And so I think that's super exciting. So the way I answer the question about what are the requirements, and it's going to come directly from the customers who are going to demand those requirements because they're using it on a day-to-day basis. So if they're saying, hey, I can't use this technology because it needs to have these things, those requirements will appear day one, instead of it being this multi-year, it takes forever for this stuff to ship. And then you find out 3 years later, we overshot on this technology or that technology. You're gonna know pretty much immediately, which is great, which is super exciting. So to me, kind of the open source engine world feels a lot like kind of the rise of digital live ops in games, but in the engine technology side. So one of the reasons we're super excited about it.
Interesting. It's funny because some people look at this from perspective, they're going, well, I'm gonna have to spend a lot more time up front, trying to get some of the pieces to work on this engine. But what you're saying is that you have a certain amount that you build up front, but you have a lot more on the backside waiting for cycles or iterations that you otherwise could turn faster in response to what your community is doing and what features that you can actually apply. That sound about right?
Yeah, and less from my perspective, we're sort of already like smashed against the customers, but I'm thinking much more from hardware manufacturing, R&D on technology, the other parts of the stack. So less me, but I'm sort of looking at the rest of the room saying like they get incentivized. And it's part of the reason why we work with them as closely as we are, is because we're sharing sort of, hey, what are the things that we think we need as a studio? And the only things we're coming up with the studio are coming directly from the customers, that we're sort of, we're very good at sort of putting stuff out to the world a little early and getting a sense, do people like this? Is this cool? And also from a games perspective, we're, very, very careful studies of the entire market. So we know which games are shipping, what customers like, what's top of the charts. There's a lot of games in the top charts, even here in the West. I'm looking at the list right now, your two of the top 3 or 4 games in the industry are things like Genshin Impact, Call of Duty Mobile, these are top 5 games, and they're highly performant. They pull hard on the battery. If you ever played Genshin Impact or Call of Duty Mobile, you'll have a good sense of that. And yet they're doing extremely well. But they do give you data for the rest of the pipeline about sort of what customers are demanding and what they'll also tolerate. Because some of these games do run hot and they do draw battery down pretty aggressively, and yet they still do very well. So the customers are telling you what they want, and there's a ton of data out there. But what's great is then that this group can take that data and build it right into the roadmap and start responding rather quickly.
Actually, that's interesting. So instead of, in other words, you're looking at any game that's built on this engine that gets feedback from their customers that are saying, hey, when I have these features on, it's killing my battery. They could basically contribute that as a focus point back into the open source community, or even the company can do that at any point in time. And that's something that you don't have to wait and prioritize. It can actually just happen in open source without somebody waiting to decide, well, do we slot that in for release? It can go in on the fly, shortening that cycle out. And if it's multiple companies at the same time, that means that you get better performance and agility to do that without waiting for the vendor to actually release the next build of it at an earlier stage.
Yeah, that's right, which is super cool.
So, we have this working group that is focused on mobile, and I really want to present it to some of the members. I think I'll start with Chris, actually. And why is your participation in this group important? Why are you prioritizing it?
As Travis said, the vast majority of people that play video games, right, are mobile players, right? We have 3 billion gamers in the world today, right? And so while we don't have, while it's more that, console players more than likely going to have mobile, then a vast majority of mobile players are also going to play on console, right? So the opportunity to create new experiences that drive new forms of entertainment, engagement, art, storytelling, and experiences on the back of other complementary technologies like, the build out of 5G, compute closer to the edge, cloud-enabled sort of services, right? Just creates this incredibly rich canvas upon which to create these brand new experiences. And it's going to happen mobile. And we think about, the next phase of interactive content media, which just virtually every industry is thinking about. And they a lot of them wrap it under this metaverse umbrella, right? For wherever that is going to be, or what that is going to be down the road, right? That remains to be seen. But the consensus, I believe, is that mobile is going to be the first way that the world touches kind of those metaverse concepts, those bigger concepts. The fact that it is a primary mode of content consumption in non-Western countries, right, is important. So it's how do we go ahead and make sure that we are applying the right lens, resource, and contribution back to open source projects like this that help to drive, again, these brand new experiences for the most widely distributed platform for content consumption on the planet. That's why mobile is so important.
So it's funny too, because when I say Chris, there's like two Chris's, and then we usually a lot of times we'll run into Chris. I go, hey, Chris M, and that still won't work here because you're both Chris M.
That's right. My apologies.
So it was
to Chris.
No problem.
But it quick point that you brought up is that when you're talking about whatever the metaverse will be, that having mobile devices is really important, which kind of parlays into what we're talking about, because performant mobile 3D type applications are still just as important when you're looking at it forward facing. But for this group, I guess, Chris Malazan, I want to get your perspective, just a short perspective on it. And then I'd like to get a perspective of, from the hardware and intermediary, why this is important and why it's a priority. So
for us, I guess it's a bit selfish. We provide game tech for a bunch of different game engines. Mostly server-side stuff, as I mentioned. So we don't tend to be as directly focused on the mobile graphics side and interacting at that layer. But we have experienced a lot of really bad mobile translated networking stacks and had to work around pain points in them to be able to ship socket connectivity APIs, so all sorts of real-time capabilities, multiplayer and bits and pieces like that. And so we just want to make sure that where we can help Open 3D Engine sort of ensure that those experiences for developers and partners who are building their game servers, their multiplayer systems, their networking layers end up being efficient and pleasant to use and ideally bug-free. So so it's a little bit less mobile graphics focused for us, but we'll help wherever we can. It's just not ending up fighting the engine to get networking APIs working well.
Hongyu, Tyrran, Tob, why this is kind of an important thing from your perspective.
So
I'll
Toby,
Hongyu,
you go first.
please.
Toby, you go first. Yeah.
Go ahead, Tob.
All right. So I'll give my hot take on this. I think the Switch really told like the story that I feel we're heading towards, which is this this gaming scenario where you take your device, unhook it from your TV, play on the go, then you end up somewhere else, hook it up, and keep playing. This complete mobile experience where in the future your device is your primary computer, not your secondary as it is right now. And we're seeing trends everywhere go in the direction. Laptops are basically glorified mobile phones at this point, and I can see a future where you grab your phone as a gaming device. You go to a hotel, you set it up. There's a huge TV anyhow in your hotel room. There might be a controller that you have with you in your pocket, or maybe you play on your phone directly, use that as a controller. There will be a multitude of devices talking to each other that you use for gaming, with your phone at the center of the whole endeavor. And that means we will be at the mercy of a lot of different standards unless we come together to unify them as a open standard that everybody contributes to. And for this to work, we need a prime example, which is then again an open source project. It must be an open source project because that's the easiest way for everyone to contribute.
Awesome. Did somebody add to that, Hongyu, or?
Sure. Yeah. I can share some my experience and opinion. So when we join O3DE, the major advantage is actually for the cross-company and cross-border collaboration. That's the most attractive part. As I mentioned earlier, like it's really hard to collaborate on some state-of-the-art graphics features. You need to sign a lot of NDAs, talk with a lot of people, with a chipset, with game engines, with game studios. That's a lot of NDA flying around. That's really a headache. And sometimes when we try to get a new collaboration on a new GPU or graphics feature, normally the game tech team, for example, graphics team, tech guys really like to collaborate. People are really excited on the new stuff, for example, ray tracing. But when we start to collaborate, most of the time that will be stopped by the business guys. They will come in saying, stop, you wait a minute, we haven't talked about business yet. We need to talk about the money, like we need to sign a contract. So that takes a lot of time, sometimes several months to complete. And the technology circle is really short. When we try to deliver some new state-of-the-art things, that take probably just we need to deliver within a year. But if the business guy try to delay you in the process for several months, that's a huge headache for our tech side collaboration. So that's some advantage for us to join the open source community. So another thing is I feel it's very helpful for small players to join the open source game engine. For example, like if you want to develop a new AR VR devices, if you want to develop a game from a smaller game studio, normally like when you try to add your unique stuff to the game engine commercialized, it's very expensive and very hard to talk with, because since you are a small player, the major game engines, they may not even care about you unless you pay big money. But for open source, they actually solve that problem. If you want to design your own stuff in your hardware device, you can easily change the game engine code and support your own device. That's the most attractive part for us. Yep.
It's interesting because the big point you brought up here is that open source helps remove that barrier of business getting in the way of advancement. I would say it is what it sounds like. It kind of shortcuts that process so that progress can actually move faster across the board. That's actually a big thing. And so, you know, I guess this one of the questions, and Travis, this is probably a little more focused to you because you've got so much experience, but are there any mobile specific tooling that that O3D really lacks or needs improvement that you think would significantly improve the workflows or help shorten development timelines?
I mean, I do think it's striking a balance of, so I'm trying to think about more broadly, like all the people in the games community rather than just my studio's perspective, because we're building a particular game, so we have a very particular lens. But in going a bit more widely, you know, there's always this tension for game studios who they tend to be, you know, cash poor, right? They're not these big companies that have lots of cash. They're trying to make these very tough decisions between you know, cost reduction and taking off the shelf tooling. So, you know, where this leads you to is very, very easy to pick up and just get going, right? So, you know, in this case, sort of think high fidelity games, you just want to pick it up, get it going, get it on n number of devices, not all devices. Because again, smaller studios, they're not looking for, you know, boiling the ocean and supporting every device out there. They're looking for that kind of 80-20 rule. They're saying, okay, for the key devices that are driving most of the market. And by the way, all the people who spend on mobile tend to also buy new devices. So sort of self-selection there. But if you know, if you're going to have a game that monetizes, you're primarily monetizing people who buy the latest hardware. People who will hold old hardware for 5-7 years also typically don't spend. So there's this natural bias towards a smaller set of hardware that supports most of the industry. So I think on one side, the studios are going to be looking for out of the box, get up and running fast, with no extra sort of bells and whistles to hit the core of devices, you know, the 80-20 rule, right? So hit those devices out of the gate, quick and easy, no effort at all required to do that. So I think that's one place where Open3D has to go, is to just out of the box support the core devices quickly and easily. And one of the great things is, of course, there's no seat licenses, no cost, there's no royalty. So from a cost savings perspective, which is top of mind for all of the studios out there, that sort of checks that box or can check that box. On the other side, studios need to stand out. You need to do something that is provocative, otherwise players won't play your game. Because nobody's going to play the same old thing they've seen over and over and over again. And this is one of the challenges in the rest of the space. I won't call anybody by name, but if you're using off-the-shelf stack and everyone's using the same stuff, all the games kind of look the same. So some of the higher end studios are, you know, doing R&D and investing in special features in the engine that give them a competitive advantage, that makes their game stand out from a customer perspective. Surprise and delight. Show me something different. Show me, and that may fall under graphics or networking technology, just give you access to new features on the server side. There's a host of things that happen there. But I think the studios are trying to sort of strike that balance. So I think for me, given that lens, the sort of two parts that I look at, you know, one, we got to make sure Open3D out of the box works great for mobile studios, and they don't have to think too much about it. Just pick it up and go. It's kind of piece number one. But then providing the direct access to the rest of the folks in this panel who are building great new technology and new cool things that the studios can very carefully select sort of one of those things from the menu, as it were, right? They don't want to do too much because it's too technically difficult and dangerous, but they need to surprise and delight customers. So they've got to pick something that is unique and innovative, or it's less likely their game is going to be successful. And I think this provides both. If we can get Open3D to be out of the box, check that box, and you also have access to new and cool technologies where the studios can partner directly with the hardware and software sort of manufacturers to get access to that new stuff, creates a pretty compelling argument going forward.
Interesting. So how do you kind of envision, you know, a lot of you here, you know, have this discussion. How do you envision working together through this working group to kind of move from, like, you know, epics to actual tactics and thing getting done? And what do you think that we'll be able to accomplish, you know, in a year? What do you think success would look like? That's open to anyone in the group here. And we're a little touched on time, so try to keep your answers brief.
I'll jump into this one. So I think one thing that Hongyu actually pointed this out already right now, which is a major problem, is that O3DE isn't really making it easy for newcomers to build a mobile application. It's not obvious how the process works, and even if you know how the process works, it's still a bit convoluted, which is really bad, because that will frighten away a lot of potential users. And these potential users might not even be programmers, but they can still write documentation. They can give tips to other people. How do you build a mobile application that immediately fries the battery because you overdid it on some fancy effect? These types of interactions, they're super important. The other thing that is super important is that these people would also naturally file bugs. They start discussions. They have demands, maybe something that they would like to see in the engine, feature requests, those kinds of things. So for me, success would in the first year would look like seeing this growth in the mobile channel quite a bit, because we made it easy for people to immediately deploy the little game on a phone.
Yeah, I would add to that, that this group here is taking their cues from the community. We are all community members like everybody else there, right? So if you have an idea, right, for those of you watching this, about the type of features you want to see or expertise that you can lend to the community to go ahead and improve those things, by all means, go ahead and do so, because we are watching. We want to take those cues as well, so we know where to prioritize our contributions back to the community to make sure that we are kind of moving this engine forward collectively, right, as a community, and making sure that we're opening up opportunity to create new forms of games across, again, the biggest platform for interactive entertainment engagement, which is mobile.
Excellent. Hongyu, you got something?
Yeah, my perspective is the first year we target to fix the mobile developer friendliness for the pipeline, the out-of-box experience when people download and start using it. My hope is not too high. I hope by the end of the year, for the new mobile developer, when they start using the O3DE, they can say, okay, I feel normal game engine experience. Not surprised, not complaining about the experience. That's already good enough for us. Yeah.
So being able to get a hello world popped up on an Android or iOS device that doesn't take you hours. I think that's really the key. And so, if we kind of loop this back around, it's really open source has the ability of allowing, faster movement on technology, removing barriers from business, allowing direct feedback from game studios to end hardware vendors and a community, to getting support in places that don't have dependencies on a whole bunch of other features to pick and choose. And most importantly, really, I would say, for one thing, for all the watchers and listeners to this, is get involved. Use your voice. Your voice is the most powerful thing that you've got in an open source community. If you come into the Discord or into the community and you say, look, I want to see, I really would like to see this thing run like this. Here's an environment that I use, and it works great when I use it like this. Bring your voice in. Use that voice, and because it allows the community to kind of focus more on what's to be accomplished and how we want to get there. You have all of these resources in front of you that you're looking at, and they are dedicated to bringing this open source project way further into mainstream to be able to get these kind of advantages for game developers and for everybody in the community. Because I can tell you, as we move forward, just like Travis said, that feedback time is shorter and shorter and shorter. And the better that we can get that feedback time cut down and new features in, that means that better games, better experiences, less battery getting killed, and having, a device that you carry around that you can still make a phone call on after you've played 30 minutes of a game on it. So, and we actually have a place where you can join the mobile device working group, get involved with the conversations. There's also an RFC that we'll be able to link, and that's kind of everything from there. So I would say, I don't know how much time do we have for Q&A? I think we ran
I
pretty.
think that we've, yeah, I think we've been responding to, doing a great job of tracking and responding to questions. If folks have any other questions, right, you can, let me forward what this.
There you go.
Yeah, you know, O3DE Discord is a great place to go, right? And you'll get all of these links in the email that we send out following today's live stream. But there is actually a thread in O3DE Discord for the mobile device working group. So we invite you to go post your questions there, interact with all of these folks. I want to thank everybody for being here and getting involved in today's discussion. And then we also want to thank all of you out there who are listening. This recording will obviously be available after today's live stream. Several of us are going to be at GDC at Game Developers Conference, March 20th through the 24th. So please come meet us there. There's actually going to be a panel discussion that Tyrran is leading around mobile gaming, mobile graphics. So again, if you're interested in this topic, come meet us there as well. And then next month we'll be talking about diving into robotics with O3DE. So we invite you to join us there. Thank you again so much to everybody, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.